Uh, our next topic, and a lot of people, we've all had people ask all of us at different times, how to podcast. And some of us have helped other people start podcasts. And it's wonderful when we can pass on the knowledge that we've accumulated. And all of us, once you've done one episode, you have picked up some knowledge about this process. So what I'd like to know from everybody on this panel is, what do you know now that you wish you knew when you started podcasting? So this would certainly be a way to give some advice to people who are thinking, could I do this? So why don't we start with, let's go back to Kim.
Yeah, there's a lot. So obviously, once you get into it, I wasn't prepared to be so addicted to it, that I would end up liking it so much and it would suck up so much of my time. And the good thing is that I started in the summer, this past summer, no, a summer ago, but I went all in over the summer and I just consumed so much information online so that I could learn how to do that. I also didn't realize that there are actually a lot of people who would love to be guests on podcasts. I kind of thought that nobody would want to come on. How am I going to find guests? And actually people are really eager to be heard and say and give what knowledge that they have. So that's another thing that I wish that I had been aware of. And then also,
wait, Kim, hold on. I'm sorry for interrupting. When you talk about people wanting to be on podcasts, are you talking about the maybe 5 to 10 emails a week you get from people out of the blue? I'm an author. I know an author. They would be a great guest on your podcast.
Okay, there's those, and I am really strict about that. I say no way more than I say yes. I actually I Google them, and I have to hear some kind of audio of them before I'll put them on my podcast. So if I can't find anything about them and they just have a basic website, they're not coming on the show. But, when I would reach out via Twitter, so many people were really willing to come on the podcast, and it really turned out to be great for my audience, because then it wasn't just like my view from a liberal state of California, Southern California. It was, I could represent teachers from all over the country, and then everyone could feel like they were represented.
Amber, what do you wish you knew when you started?
I think my experience is that is more of the technical side of things. I'm still learning best practices, or maybe not best practices, but better practices than what I knew at the beginning. Such as even remembering to check my sound to make sure my mic is working before I do an interview. I still have some interviews that I've done in the past that I haven't launched yet on an official episode that I'm like, oh, I forgot to turn my mic on, that kind of stuff. Also, the things that I've learned from interviewing other people who have had podcasts for a long time, such as you, Chris, that I'm just learning here and there. One thing that I learned from doing an interview this past summer was Vicki Davis taught me, just from interviewing me. She said, we're going to hold silent for 5 seconds, and then we're going to do the interview, and then I'm going to pause for 5 seconds. Don't hang up on me. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's so good, because I would jump right into asking questions right away whenever I hit record, and it sounded like I was yelling at people. So, which is not good in the ear, and a lot of people are listening, either in their car or with earbuds in. I realized that I was coming across like really aggressive with my volume. So I've learned a lot of things technically. And I'm still consistently learning new tools, new techniques in that way. There's a lot of things that I listening back to other episodes that I've done, previously a year ago, that I'm like, oh, I wish I would have known that. But I mean, you live, you learn. When you know better, you do better.
And sometimes the technology part is fun too. I do like to also look at the different stuff that's out there, but I think it can be really overwhelming. I don't know if you found that too, Amber, when people start talking about mixers and condensers, and I'm like, okay, my microphone's fine for me. Thank you. So, it's easy to go down, especially I bet with you, Chris, to go down the technology, like geeking out on it, down that rabbit hole.
Oh, I'm definitely a gear head, a gear geek, but I also have a budget. So
Right.
Right.
we can't go as crazy as we might like, but we're aware of a lot of stuff.
Well, and
I
I
don't think
think I
there's-
went, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I don't think I can put this on donors' shoes. So, yeah, I have a budget.
Well, that was the thing too. I
Gotta
kind
get
of,
sponsors.
yeah,
That's true.
right. How do you get those?
Oh,
So
I'll tell them.
so one thing though that I went into it knowing I was just going to dive in, I learned best by just making mistakes, getting my hands dirty, breaking stuff and fixing it. I'm not a big because I'll get into a rabbit hole and then I get paralyzed. I get that paralysis by overanalysis.
Yeah.
So I thought I'm just going to dive in. Again, Pat Flynn, I watched his video series on YouTube and just went for it. And it was actually a lot easier to start than what I ever had expected. And then, the details, the things that make it better have just come along the way, the longer that I've done it.
Sam, what about you? Oh, go ahead, Mike. I'm sorry.
No, go Sam. Go Sam.
Okay.
Go, Sam.
Woo! Mine isn't anything profound. It's just to always be adding to your list of topics. So there'll be times I'll be driving in the car or, like, oh, I should do that on an episode of the podcast. So I love using Google Keep because I can do my voice recording in there or I can just, text it in there. So I'm always adding to my list and it's super long and I love that. So when I'm like, I don't know what to do an episode on. I should look at my list. And it's always there and accessible to me. Also being consistent, like if you're gonna do like weekly or twice a month or whatever it is, stay on that schedule. And I learned that from Amy Porterfield, she was like, oh, I started a podcast and, I didn't really do too much with it. And then, I started being consistent and that's where, the momentum started to build. So being consistent, I only skipped 1 week and it was ISTE week and I felt so terrible, but it's okay. And also I think the same thing that you guys were saying, it's not hard once you get into like the rhythm of it. And like I have a little checklist that I follow every episode that I do, but it is time consuming. And I think once I get better at it, the time will start to shave off a little bit, or I'll be less nitpicky with editing, whichever comes first. But I love my checklist and I have it laminated, so I do all my things. And I found that to be really helpful. So I've been, doing the Canva posts and things like that. So making sure I hit all my bases before something goes out that day.
On your point about having a list of topics, I wish that I had thought about doing a content calendar before. So it really helps to not only take those topics, but align them up on weeks. And I've been bad about that lately. This has been kind of a rough year, but in the past I've done that, especially because I told you guys that I like to do my episodes seasonally. So yes, grading applies all the time, but when do we start grading? Right before the first grading period? When does that really matter? After teachers are talking about setting up their room. So setting up the room happens in September. So I think that if you come up with your topics and you actually plan them out and when you're going to do them, then you don't have that, what am I going to do next week? You just look on the calendar and that's what you're going to talk about.
If I could add on to what you just said, Kim, and I know you mentioned this whenever you introed your podcast, themes. Last year, if I would have the first half of the year, so I'm talking September through December, I just talked randomly about different topics or had different guests come on randomly. And then I learned about having themes. So I started themes in January and then had a monthly theme. And then it hit me then how much easier it was on the brain to have themes where I was seeking out certain people to talk about certain things on certain months. And I've continued that this year with season 3 of the podcast. And now that's another thing I would do differently. But starting here, with season 3 at the beginning of September, I now have a theme every month that's going to last the entire season of this podcast. So it makes things so much simpler. You don't feel like you're kind of grasping at straws. You have more of a focused purpose.
And I think it will also help with, sorry, Chris, I think it's going to help with discovery as well, because if you're talking about topics that are fresh on the minds of your listeners or people who are searching for that because they're having that particular struggle at that particular time, I think that has helped my audience grow. So for example, I talk about interviewing and resumes in May. because that's when we're going to start hiring, is June and July. So I think if you're really strategic about it, and then also when you push it out on social media, that can really help your listenership grow. Okay,
Very
your
true.
turn, Chris.
What I was going to say, and kudos to Amber. She talked about the idea of the seasons, but Amber also does a great job. She's got some great documents for planning through Google Sheets and through Google Docs, where she really lays out, week by week, topic by topic, and has her checklist is digital. And Amber, you just do a really great job. And I've told this to a lot of people recently, how you plan and the work that goes into preparing. And I think preparing is something that we've all hit on, is you can't just turn on the mic and go. You have to have some sort of plan. And the longer you do this, the more efficient you will become at planning.
It's true. And I'm willing to share those documents with anybody. And actually, my content calendar came from Amy Porterfield.
Nice.
I just put my own spin on it, to match my needs. But it's a game changer. It's a game changer to be well prepared. And something else I wish I would have learned too, and please forgive me if you feel like I'm dominating this section, but I just learned so much. The batching. The idea of batching your interviews, batching your intros and outros. Chris is especially helping me to stay on task with that. But not feeling like I'm consistently trying to keep up every week. Like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be releasing an episode on Monday. I have got to get an interview in this week. Either that or I'm going to have to randomly do a solo cast or something. But having a week or two where you just schedule out a bunch of interviews and then utilize those for the next 3 months, that's huge. That has been huge for me.
I think one of the biggest things that I've realized, and that as I talk to people about podcasting, is that this can be as little or as big as you possibly want it to be. And there's no limit to either of those things. Like I've been interviewed by someone who literally pressed record on her cell phone and put it to my face and asked me questions, and then, then hit send, and it went to Anchor, and it was out. And then you have an operation like On Education, where I was actually just looking at my calendar. We have guest booked. Our next available open date is February the 3rd for guests. And we are a business. One of the big success stories, at least in my mind, for On Education, is how well we've done at connecting with people that we believe in, companies to sponsor us. I mean, you can make money podcasting. On Education has made well over 5 figures in income on our podcast. So it's entirely possible. We've funded, I mean, if you're looking on Zoom, you're looking at, a pretty expensive microphone. And if you see us at FETC or at Impact Education Conference in Minnesota, you're going to see a pretty wicked, live setup. We have a legit setup now, and it's all because of connecting with sponsors. And but we don't just take anybody. We we believe in the folks that sponsor us. We know them. We know their products. I mean, Classcraft, for example, is our presenting sponsor, and we're really good friends with those folks and doing a lot of cool stuff with them. So we've done really well with that. Speaking to a couple of the other comments that were really interesting, we have an outline. It's one of the first things when I was learning, because I didn't know how to do a podcast either when we started. So I read a whole bunch of stuff on how to do one. And one of the things was have an outline. So we have an outline for every episode. I think the first episode's outline was probably about 11 pages long. We literally wrote notes for everything. They're much shorter now, and we write them quite a bit faster. I remember those first few months where we would finish recording an episode, and then we would start the outline for the episode the next week or the next day, and we would work on it the entire week until we recorded again. Now, it seems Glenn and I are quite a bit better at it. It's also helpful that there's 2 of us. I don't know how many other of you have a co-host. I don't think any of you do. But having a co-host helps because, there's, it's just more people. And we have a team now. On Education there's 4 of us now, basically, that work on the podcast in various aspects. So There's lots of voices, lots of ideas floating around about what to do and how to do it. But our outline now is quite a bit smaller, but it has production notes. It has, when the ads are going on, and, the scripts for the ads, and our guest interview and the questions. That's kind of what we work on most with the outline, because our podcast is also pretty timely in terms of topics. We're talking about the things that are happening, in the frame of what's happened in the last couple weeks, referencing articles that have come out and stuff like that, and then drawing on those topics and referencing those. So we are, someone else had mentioned before, trying to stay topical within a certain space of time, because that's when it's relevant, whatever you might be talking about. Like, so at the end of school, we talked about end of school stuff. We had a new teacher roundtable episode in August, where we had a bunch of brand new second year teachers talking about their first year teacher experience. And hopefully we had a lot of people who were just about to start their first year of teaching listening and learning about what that was like from people who just went through it. I think that was a great episode. I was super happy to put that together. The calendar is my best friend at this point. The Google Calendar we have a very strict schedule. The podcast comes out on Tuesday. The blog post comes out on Friday. We have a Twitter chat on education on Fridays. We record on Monday nights now. And everything is like my sponsorships, when they go and how long they go for, when I'm supposed to follow up with them to talk about renewing. Everything is on a calendar now, and it's the Bible for me. So I definitely live and die by my Google Calendar. Glenn hates all of the calendar invites that I send him, which is a ton. But it's important to so like I said, you can make this as big or small as you want, but when we've made it this big, you have to be also very well planned. So like there's a lot of organization. I probably when we started, I was probably putting 40 hours a week into the podcast. So I was working and also putting, almost a whole other full-time job worth of time into the podcast. I'm probably close to 10 hours to 15 hours a week, not including recording time, which is another close to 3 hours basically. So I'm probably putting in between 10 and 20 hours a week into the podcast now. But things are a lot easier now, and we've kind of gotten into a groove. It's good to remember that you don't have to feel pressure to make this like a giant monster of a thing. You can do this super simply. I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later, that you can do this just as easily by pressing record on your cell phone and going.
I think that's, but before we get to the next thing, and Dr. Will has, that next question, but my big takeaway from this segment is that, there's all different ways to do this. There's not just one way to create a podcast, totally. But I think the common theme is, have a sense of organization, have that plan. And just like when we're in the classrooms, have your plan and then work your plan. But yeah, there's all different shapes and sizes and flavors of how to do this.